Assalamualaikum and welcome back to Liga Sembang, where law meets vibe and real talk. I'm Huda. This is Amni and Amisya. Today we're diving into something quite significant in the world of Malaysian law, like constitution level groundbreaking.
That's right. Today we're talking about the Constitution Amendment Bill 2025. Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim is shaking things up with a proposal that could make Parliament more independent than ever before.
Exactly. This amendment could shift the way our government works, giving Parliament more freedom to function without outside pressure. In simple terms, it's about making sure each branch of government knows its lane and stay in it. That's the best part. We're not doing this alone. Joining us online today is a very special guest who's ready to share their insight on this amendment.
So, buckle up because in this episode we're breaking down what this amendment means, how it could change the game for Malaysia's democracy, and of course, how the constitution actually gets amended in the first place.
Okay, Amni, can you explain more about the proposed amendment bill?
So I'll explain further. The Constitution Amendment Bill 2025 proposed by Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim is a significant step towards institutional reform in Malaysia. Its primary aim is to ensure parliamentary independence, thereby enhancing the separation of powers between the executive, legislative and judiciary branches. Before this amendment, Malaysia's parliament was administratively placed under the Prime Minister Department, with staffing and operational matters handled by government agencies rather than by Parliament itself. The original Parliamentary Service Act PSA of 1963, which gave Parliament control over its own administration and budget, was repealed in 1992, leaving Parliament dependent on the executive for resources and staff appointments. What the amendment does: New Clause 5A in Articles 56 and 57 allows the Dewan Rakyat Speaker, Dewan Negara President and their deputies to sit on PSC without vacating or being disqualified from their parliamentary roles, provided they do not receive any additional remuneration or benefits. Revision of Article 65 transfer the appointment of the Secretary of the House of Representatives and the Secretary of the Senate from the Executive to the Yang di-Pertuan Agong, insulating this office from political influence. So, Article 56 and 57, protecting presiding officers, insertion of Clause 5A, both Articles 56 Dewan Rakyat and 57 Dewan Negara gain a new clause 5A, which explicitly permits the Speaker and President and their deputies to serve on the PSC without forfeiting their parliamentary office. These safeguards ensure they remain in post so long as they accept no extra pay, gifts, profits or benefit from commission duties. Article 65, insulating parliamentary secretaries. Royal appointment. Article 65 is amended to transfer the power to appoint the clerk, secretary of the Dewan Rakyat and the clerk of the Dewan Negara from the executive branch to the Yang di-Pertuan Agong. These officers may be drawn from the public service or appointed externally and will serve until the term expires. Their appointment is revoked or they resign the age of Malaysia. Enshrining the Parliamentary Service Commission constitutional status. The bill embeds its Parliamentary Service Commissions in the Constitution, empowering it to oversee all parliamentary human resources, administration and financial management functions hitherto managed by the Prime Minister Department, the Public Service Department and the Ministry of Finance, DH of Malaysia. And the scope of powers, the PSC will have authority over appointment terms, promotions, disciplinary proceedings and appeals for parliamentary staff, as well as monitoring and approving budgets dedicated to parliamentary service. The next is compositions and bipartisan representation chaired and co-chairs. The PSC will be chaired by the Dewan Negara President and co-chaired by the Dewan Rakyat Speaker, ensuring leadership by two presiding officers, the stars. And the membership. In addition to the chair and co-chair, the commissions include the Senate Deputy President, two Dewan Rakyat Deputy Speakers, 2 Senators and 4 MPs, balanced equally between government and opposition appointees. Ex-officio members include the Treasury Secretary General or representative, the Public Service Director General or representative, and the Parliament Chief Administrator, the Star DH Malaysia. So, what will all this change means to Malaysia? The first one is stronger separation of powers. Parliament becomes more independent from the executive, and the second is better checks and balance. The legislature can now properly scrutinize government's actions, and the third one is bipartisan governance. The PSC ensure decisions aren't controlled by just one party, and the next one is improve transparency and professionalism. Parliament will be better equipped to serve the people. And in conclusion, the Constitution Amendment Bill 2025 represents a bold step forward for Malaysia's democracy. By empowering Parliament to govern itself, we are taking important steps toward a more accountable, transparent and mature democratic system.
Well, that is such a great explanation, Amni. Thank you so much for that. And now let's move on to Amisya. Can you explain the implication of this proposed amendment bill?
Okay, first of all, let's talk about separation of power. In theory, Malaysia government is divided into three branches: the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. They are supposed to function independently, right? But here's the thing: in Malaysia, these branches often overlap, especially for executive and the legislature. For example, the Prime Minister and most cabinet member are also member of the parliament. That means all the executive often has a lot of control over what happened in parliament. Now, this amendment want to untangle the relationship a bit. It's about giving parliament more room to breathe so it can operate independently. That might mean reforming how the speaker and deputy speaker are appointed, so they are not just aligned with the ruling government. It could also mean letting parliament control its own schedule, committee and budget instead of waiting on the executive approval. The big idea here, a parliament that's free to challenge the executive, not just follow its leads. So next, let's talk about the something called legislative autonomy. That's a fancy way of saying let parliament run its own house. So right now, a lot of parliament operation like staffing, budgeting, infrastructure are under the executive influence. But this amendment could change that by setting up or strengthening something like a Parliamentary Services Commission. That's a body that would handle all of the parliament internal affairs independently. Imagine if parliament could hire its own people, manage its own facility and control its own finance without needing to ask the executive for permission. That's the goal here. It's about building a self-sufficient parliament, one that's not constantly looking over its shoulder. Lastly, one of the most significant implications is the principle of checks and balance. We always hear that phrase tossed around, but what does it actually mean? It's the idea that no one branch of government should have too much power because the other are too there to keep it in check. But when parliament is not truly independent, it cannot play that role properly. So this amendment could fix that. With more freedom, parliament could become a much stronger watchdog. It could create more active and empower select committee to investigate and monitor government activity. It could push back on questionable policy or misuse of power. And here's another piece: it could also refine anti-defection law. You know, the one that stop MP from jumping party. So the goal is to try a balance between party loyalty and the MP's right to vote based on their own judgment. Because what's the point on having parliament if everyone just voting the way their party tells them to? So I think that's all from me.
So Huda, before we dive into the 2025 Amendment Bill, can you explain why it's so difficult to amend the federal constitution in the first place?
Okay, when we talk about the constitution, we're talking about the supreme law of the land. Because of its important, changing is not something that can be done overnight. That's why Malaysia has a specific legal process for making amendment. So the process starts when the amendment is drafted, then reviewed by the Attorney General Chamber (AGC). Then once it's approved, it will be sent to the Parliament. Okay, in Parliament, the bill goes through 3 main readings. The first reading, actually only the title is read out, so no debate happens yet. And the second reading, the members of Parliament will discuss the purpose of the bill. Then the committee stage, every part of the bill is reviewed in detail. And the last one, which is the third reading, the members of Parliament will vote on the final version. In order to pass it, it needs at least a 2/3 majority. And after the Dewan Rakyat pass the bill, it goes through to the Dewan Negara, which follow the same step. The Senate cannot reject the bill, but only can delay it up to a year. Then the bill goes to Yang di-Pertuan Agong, the King. He has only 30 days to give the royal assent. If no decision is made, the bill becomes a law automatically on the day 31st. finally, it is established in the Government Gazette and it becomes part of the Constitution. So what is interesting is that not all the provisions are treated the same depending on how sensitive a clause is.
Wait, so not all amendments follow the same rules? How does that work?
Yes, exactly. There are actually 4 different methods by which amendment can be made, and each one of it has its own requirement. So first of all, the most commonly used method is the amendment requiring a 2/3 majority under the Article 159 Clause 3. And this applies to the most part of the Constitution. A bill to amend this provision must go through both House of Parliament and be passed by not less than 2/3 of the total number of members of each house. So on both the second and the third reading, and in Dewan Rakyat, there's at least about 148 out of 222 members, and in Dewan Negara, there's at least unit 47 out of 70 senators to say yes. And we're talking about an absolute 2/3 majority, not just a 2/3 of those present and voting. That means non-voting and absent count against the code. So if a member does not show up or choose not to vote, it is essentially the same as voting no. And this means actually to make sure the significant amendment truly reflect the broad consensus, not just a temporary majority. And now the second method is a bit more relaxed. Amendment that just required only a simple majority as stated under Article 159 Clause 4. So the requirement is just more flexible, and just over half of the members who are present and voting need to support the bill. In this method reserved for only the provision that are considered less sensitive or more procedural. And the third category, which is quite important, which is this require not only the 2/3 majority in the parliament but also need the consent of the conference of ruler as stated in Article 159 Clause 5. Because of this amendment involve sensitive issues that are deeply tied in Malaysian national identity and history. For example, like the issue like freedom of speech, national security, Sedition Act, and other than that, like under Article 152 and 53 regarding the national language and the special position of Malay and native of Sabah and Sarawak. Even the Parliament agrees on the amendment, it cannot be passed unless the Conference of Ruler give the approval. This actually to ensure there is no hasty changes are made to a significant cultural and political issue. And the fourth method, which is the last one, amendment that affect the special safeguard of Sabah and Sarawak, and you also need the consent of Yang di-Pertua Negeri, the governors of these two states, as stated under Article 161E. This actually to safeguard and protect the citizenship rights for people Sabah and Sarawak, and maybe like the allocation seat in the parliament. And now when it comes to the main topic that we're just discussing today, which is the Constitution Amendment Bill 2025. This bill actually following the exact process that I just explained. It was drafted by the relevant ministry and then reviewed by the AGC and then approved by the cabinet. And on 4th March 2025, the bill was passed in the Dewan Rakyat with exactly 148 members of parliament voting in favour, just enough to meet the 2/3 majority. That it was passed in Dewan Negara on 20 March 2025. And this bill actually now waiting for the Yang di-Pertuan Agong approval. If the king does not make a decision within 30 days, the bill automatically become the law on the 31st day. Okay, once the king approves it, the bill will be published in the Government Gazette and will officially become the part of the Constitution. And the main change in the bill 2025 is to strengthen the parliamentary independence and improve the separation of power. This actually very important change, and why it had to be passed with 2/3 majority in both houses. And now, let's move on to our special guest, Dr. Shuhaila, a lecturer at University of Oxford. She will join us through online platform.
Thank you, Liga Sembang, for having me in a podcast today. I will explain a bit about arguments for and against the amendment from a constitutional perspective. So first, we look into enhancing parliamentary sovereignty. So the Federal Constitution recognizes Parliament as co-equal branch of government alongside the executive and judiciary, so granting Parliament greater autonomy in managing its internal affairs such as control over its budget, scheduling and appointments would strengthen the sovereignty and independence of the legislative branch. This empowerment ensures that Parliament can function more effectively and free from undue executive influence, thereby reinforcing democratic principles and the proper separation of powers within the constitutional framework. Next is improving accountability. So, Improving accountability. This means strengthening legislative oversight mechanisms such as the establishment and empowerment of select committees would enable Parliament to scrutinise executive actions more effectively. This enhanced oversight promotes accountability and transparency, which are essential pillars of constitutional democracy and good governance. By adopting such measures, Malaysia can move closer to the practice of mature parliamentary democracies like the United Kingdom or Canada, where robust legislative oversight plays a key role in maintaining a healthy balance of power between branches of government. Lastly, legal protection for MPs. The amendment would serve to solidify legal protection for members of parliament, particularly in safeguarding their freedom of speech and expression within the House. By reinforcing this right, the reform will uphold the integrity of parliamentary debates and ensure the MPs can perform their duties without fear of retaliation. This will also help prevent abuses such as politically motivated suspensions or selective prosecution, thereby fostering a more open, fair and democratic legislative environment. Next, we will continue with the arguments against the amendment. First is potential for constitutional overreach. Critics may argue that such an amendment could disrupt the constitutional equilibrium by shifting too much power towards Parliament, potentially weakening the executive ability to govern effectively, particularly in times of emergency or national crisis when swift and decisive action is crucial. Excessive parliamentary independence might also lead to challenges in maintaining policy coherence and efficient execution, as increased scrutiny and procedural hurdles could slow down the decision-making process. Balancing autonomy with functionality would therefore be essential to ensure that reforms strengthen democracy without compromising governance. Next is a risk of legislative gridlock. A more autonomous parliament could also give rise to partisan obstruction or delays in legislative process. This concern is especially relevant in Malaysia's multi-coalition political landscape, while beneficial for check and balance, might inadvertently lead to legislative gridlock if political divisions dominate parliamentary proceedings. Such a scenario could hinder the timely passage of important laws and policies, ultimately affecting governance and public confidence in the legislative system. Last but not least, ambiguity and legal uncertainty. If the amendment lacks clear procedural definitions and well-defined limits of autonomy, it could give rise to constitutional disputes or require judicial intervention to resolve the ambiguities. Uncertainty over roles such as who controls the legislative agenda or holds authority over budget allocation may create institutional friction between Parliament and Executive. Without precise legal framework, the intended balance of power could instead result in confusion, inefficiency, or power struggles, undermining the very purpose of the reform. Clear, detailed provision would therefore be essential to ensure smooth implementation and institutional harmony. So I think that's all from me. If you guys have any other question, just please let me know. Okay, thank you for having me. Bye.